Hello and welcome to the first in a webinar series presented by NISI Learning and focusing on topics around education, alternative provision, online learning, policy, strategy, and we'll also bring in a bit of reality as well. My name's David Lester and I'm Group Learning Services Director at NISI, and I'll be your host for today's session, where we'll be getting input from several panelists who are looking at the same issues but from different perspectives. Today, we'll also provide an opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Charter, an initiative driven by NISI, providing a framework built around inclusive, learner-first education. The session is going to be split into two halves. The first taken up with scene setting and providing some level of context behind the challenges being faced and the solutions available, and why we at NISI feel it's necessary to open up the discussion in this forum. The second will be a question and answer session, and we'd welcome questions from everyone attending today on any of the points discussed or any points you feel need mentioning. Your questions can be put in the comments box and our team will pick those up. So moving on to the first part of the context, I'd like to start off by sharing a video where I hope you'll get a better understanding of NISI as a support network and education provider for children and young people, and also get an insight into the people who are involved on a day-to-day basis with our students, parents, schools, and local authorities.
The technology about teaching at a distance, and when we were asked to see how we can support children with learning needs and medical needs in early 2000, we had an ability solution to do that with live teachers. So it was something which we tried and to do it as a pilot, but when I started looking at how these students were taught, basically they were not given the skills, they were not given the currency subject, they were just told you do whatever is right, where they were capable of doing GCSEs and A-levels. So I felt very much motivated to get something done, and that's when NISI came out.
When we receive information from a customer, whether that be a school or a local authority, we obviously can see a background for a student. But then what we see when we start to engage them and they learn with us can be different, because they're learning with us in a different environment. They're safe in their home. I can think of many examples of students that have really made a difference to their lives and their families' lives. We've had students one particular who was really unwell to the point of being on oxygen at home and couldn't leave the house. And he was with us for about 6 years, and he just did one subject a year, and then as he was feeling well, it started to improve. And we were absolutely delighted when he passed his A-levels with us. We all got to know him really well and his family, and it was brilliant. And then we got the amazing news that he actually was able to go to university, and he left the family home and went to uni, which is just mind-blowing.
We can be recognised and named on an educational care and health plan as an educational setting, which is crucial for local authorities sourcing those types of provisions, especially when they're working with these post-16 students and they're looking at transitioning them onto their next kind of setting, their next pathway, that type of thing. To do that, they provide us with what they call a consultation. And here at NISI, we've worked really, really hard to put together a fantastic team that take those consultations, they look over the plans, they identify where we can meet needs, we look at the outcomes of the student, and also the different pathways that we can provide as well. We go back with a comprehensive response, and from that point we will then speak with the linked case officer, we will speak with families to kind of tie it all together. We then become the team around the child as well and part of that. So that's how we support our local authorities.
In terms of technology, we are hugely innovative and really do embrace technologies. We have our own in-house team who develop our assistive learning tools, and we've really seen the impact that has on our students, and some of them are really flourishing by using those systems that we have.
Everything is very new, every day is very different. There's always a new challenge. And for me, that's great. Our students are everything to me. I want to do the very best I can for our students. We're different to the traditional school setting, which is based on age. For NISI, we set more by ability. So when a student joins us, we look at their maths and English scores to kind of give us a baseline about where we think they would be best suited. We then timetable them for their classes, but in their lessons when they join, they do a prior learning assessment, which gives us more of an indication about their strengths and their weaknesses, possible gaps that they may have. So it's very supportive. We put everything there for our students. We give them access to all of our lesson materials. So what they have in the class, they can access outside of the classroom too.
Internationally, we work with government organisations, schools, learning centres, for again students who have special educational needs, or students who come to us because they want an internationally recognised curriculum, which they can help them to move to other countries, to attend university.
Exactly, NISI gives us each equality and gives us the freedom to learn in a manner of which works for each of us as individuals. And I'd like to thank them very much for that, and I'd like to thank them for their thinking and innovation, and thanking them for allowing me to do all that I've been able to do thanks to their hard work and commitment towards not only all the students, but also all the staff, to make sure that they all are in a comfortable environment that works best for everyone. Thank you.
So some of the faces you'll see today will be familiar from the video. And we're going to start with Dhruv Patel, NISI's CEO and founder. Since 1996, Dhruv has spent nearly 3 decades pioneering virtual classroom models that empower thousands of students worldwide, especially those underserved by traditional education. As chairman of the NISI Education Trust, he champions scholarships and initiatives for disadvantaged learners, while also serving as vice president of the World Didactic Association, driving global EdTech collaboration and inclusive education policy. The strategic partner of UNESCO IITE, Dhruv actively advances the Sustainable Development Goals, promotes equitable education across the ASEAN region as a keynote speaker, co-authors research with the Asian Development Bank, and contributes to high-level delegations of the World Bank, IMF, IDB, and USAID. I'd now like to hand over to Dhruv for his insight into why there's a need for a charter and why it matters. Over to you, Dhruv.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you all for taking the time to attend this important event on why the Charter matters. I founded NISI in 1996, and it became very clear to me that many learners had unique needs that were underserved by mainstream education only. I believed then and believe now that current system too often fails those who don't fit the mold students withstand: chronic health needs, anxiety, who simply cannot thrive in a main school classroom setting. That failure is not because people don't care. I have met hundreds of policymakers, government ministers, and of course teachers, all of whom are deeply committed to education, and previous initiatives such as Every Child Matters all had great intent. But I believe passionately that we must and can do most more to restore equity for those who have been underserved by the current system. We need to work collaboratively with schools, local authorities, and local stakeholders to support our most vulnerable learners. My team and I have created Every Learner Charter with the aim of building upon the current system, which is struggling to support all children to thrive. It recognizes the fundamental truth that blended and online learning is an essential part of an online and option. It's not an optional extra. It is part of a complete mix which we need to work with. Since 1996, we have supported thousands of learners in the UK and thousands more internationally now. And we have expanded our offering across Asia, where we encounter many of the same challenges. NISI Learning has been both my life's work and my greatest pleasure. The webinar today will discuss the Charter in more detail and why it matters to us, but fundamentals should matter to everyone invested in education. I'm convinced that a successful education strategy is key to a successful society, and it all starts with three key principles of the Charter: reconnect, empower, and elevate. I look forward to us discussing each of them today. And my final point is that we can't do this on our own. We need each and every person seeing this webinar live and later on today across social media to support the aims and aspirations of the Charter. The NISI Charter matters because every learner matters. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dhruv, and thanks for your insight and commitment to making a difference. I know you personally take it on board to transform education, not just in the UK, but also internationally. So thanks for your introduction there.
Thank you.
We're now going to move on to our second speaker, Lee Findell, partner at WA Comms, who will discuss how the Every Learner Charter will work. He is a corporate communications and stakeholder engagement expert with over 25 years experience. He's worked for some of the world's most recognizable companies, leading high-profile strategic communication campaigns. He's worked on education policy for decades, including advising universities such as Newcastle, Warwick, Brunel, Northumbria and Richmond, skills organisations like City and Guilds, ECTIS and AELP, and education providers, Outcomes First and Targeted Provision. He also regularly speaks on panels discussing education policy. And before entering consultancy, Lee was the Vice President Education of the NUS. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and also thank you to Dhruv for your early introduction. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon as part of the launch of the Every Learner Charter, and to basically speak to the broader policy case for not only why this work matters, but why it matters this time, why it matters right now. So what is the context? Well, we know the education system is under immense pressure with growing demands and workloads on our educators. There is an ongoing issue with school absence, and while it has begun to come down at 6.7%, is still 2% higher than it was pre-pandemic, and with persistent absence running at 18%, almost double what it was before the pandemic. So we also have a situation with a growing number of learners with unmet needs, and the cracks in the EHCP system are all too apparent, with inconsistencies and delays coupled with escalating costs and financial pressures. These are all symptoms of a model that so far failed to adapt to the diversity of today's learners. The government, and in particular the new Labour administration, recognises this. They're clear that things need to change, and ministers have consistently stressed the importance of belonging as they seek to drive up attendance levels, which wasn't good enough even in some regions, even before the pandemic. And a glance at any education media outlet can tell us that EHCP reform is firmly on the table, with ministers starting to see their approach with the sector and how they want to approach this complex issue. There's also real interest in reducing exclusions and addressing what's driving the rise in NEET figures for those not in education, employment or training, which sits currently at an unacceptable 12.5%. So it's, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lost opportunities for young people. But none of these ambitions will succeed unless we also expand the tools we're using to engage and support learners. And that is where the Every Learner Charter comes in. It's not just a vision statement, it's a practical framework with 6 clear deliverable recommendations that could unlock real progress in this space and in the sector. These are, firstly, a streamlined national EHCP system that ensures no learner is left waiting for the support they need to thrive. Secondly, fair and accessible exam routes for all learners, including remote invigilation, to ensure that no learner faces a closed door at exam time because they're currently sat outside mainstream schools. Proper recognition of online teaching as a specialism, including updated qualification routes to reflect the changing needs and changing dynamics of learners and what is needed in the space. We also need a unified inspection regime that brings that high quality online provision and hybrid provision into Ofsted scope to ensure that every learner, wherever they're taught, benefit from the same commitment to quality that you see with mainstream schools. In addition, we need to look at structured partnerships between schools and SEND specialists, ensuring the right expert support is in place when it is needed and where it is needed. And critically, parity of esteem for blended learning that enables it to be seen not as a last resort, but as a first class and indeed the best option for many learners. These are policy shifts that speak directly to the challenges government is trying to solve, and where the evidence already exists that change is possible. So why now? Well, we have a window of opportunity. A new government is in place, as I've already said, with a strong mandate and a clear desire to do things differently, especially when it comes to inclusion in education. Indeed, a commitment to an inclusive education system was almost the first thing that the Secretary of State said when she stepped in through the doors of the DfE after her appointment last June. There's growing cross-party consensus that we cannot continue with a model that only works for some learners some of the time, and change will be necessary if we are to secure a truly inclusive education system. So our message to policymakers is this: the tools exist, the models are there and are proven to work, and the sector is ready. Let's give every learner, that means every learner, the chance to thrive, not in spite of the system, but because the system finally recognises and responds to who they are. I'd really encourage everyone who's joined us today, whether you're a teacher, policymaker, parent or commissioner, to read the Charter, share it and use it, because meaningful change isn't just about those big reform packages. It is also about the day-to-day choices we make to put learners first. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Lee. And I think picking up from something that you said there about the Charter, it's not just a vision. I think the fact that it is evidence-based and experience behind it has that bit more substance, and it's great that cross-party ears are open for the need for change. I think it's just seeing how that materialises. But thanks again. Leading on to our next speaker, Jen Gerber, who is Senior Political Advisor at WA Comms. Jen was a long-standing Special Advisor to Labour, Labour star Andy Burnham, and has 20 years of political experience. She was a Labour Special Advisor in government to Andy Burnham, His Majesty's Treasury, and at a time of a global financial crisis, and through a comprehensive spending review. She also advised him at DCMS and the Department of Health. Most recently, she's held senior communications roles in both the Refugee Council and the Shelford Group of NHS Hospital Trusts. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's really great to be here. I should add, in addition to my over 20 years of kind of political experience, I'm a mother of three, including a 13-year-old child with special educational needs who has an EHCP and attends a mainstream school. So these issues are both, have occupied my mind from a policy perspective and a political perspective, but also from a personal one. And that's led to me having lots of conversations over the years with various cabinet ministers, some who have personal experience of their own with special educational needs. So I'm going to give, kind of in the 5 minutes, a bit of a gallop through some of the kind of key political issues and context to what Lee said, I guess, where the government is kind of specifically on SEN and the opportunities that offers NISI. And what I should start by saying is, obviously, politics at the moment is very febrile. It always is, but the last year, and this government have only been in place just under a year, we've seen an awful lot of upsets and also an awful lot of challenges fundamentally and centrally financial and economic. So I guess one thing to say, I don't think you need me to say this, but when the government is thinking about education, SEN in particular, they will be looking at the money essentially. What do they have? What's their fiscal headroom? And unfortunately, though I think education, there has been money ploughed in, unfortunately not enough, I think, to do what they want to do, which again offers opportunities for others to kind of come in and explain why perhaps it isn't necessarily as bleak as some feel. And I think on SEN and inclusion, they have started to have various conversations with various people, and the direction of travel seems to be inclusion, which lots of people have welcomed, but perhaps moving away from EHCPs for non-acute cases and moving a lot of children in from specialist provision to mainstream schools, which in theory is supported by lots of people, but in theory you also need the funding, the training, the ability for a lot of these mainstream schools essentially to accommodate new students. And that's where the kind of hybrid learning, online learning, I think a lot of people are already thinking, well, what's the process for this change? If the government are committed to that kind of direction of travel, so a lot of children who have had EHCPs fought, families who have fought for these, what does it mean then to potentially take away that provision, move them into mainstream schools focused on inclusion? But then what does that mean for teachers who have not had any training? Who will have, but in that period of kind of change and churn. So I think there are opportunities there. And again, I don't think anything is set in stone. And I know from conversations with various MPs, special advisors, they're very aware that this is a difficult issue for a lot. It's not an easy issue to grapple with. And I think you've seen that because there were indications that we might have a SEN kind of white paper, then indications that there won't quite, maybe it's not going to be a white paper, it could be a costed plan, and then maybe a bill in the King's speech. So all these things are kind of being thought through. And I think Lee spoke about some of the issues with the kind of funding, and a lot of councils, you've seen people like John Harris in The Guardian write quite a few articles about the funding crisis that many local authorities have in terms of their SEN spend and the budget because of the rise in the HCPs. And so it's a really live issue, and it affects, in terms of its kind of politics, it affects local councils, and obviously it affects families and schools. And so I actually think at the moment there's so much going on. There are so many headline issues, the winter fuel, we've got the spending review tomorrow, we've got changes in the health spending, and it's just England, there's been rather a lot. I think this is going to slowly but surely rise up the political agenda. And actually it's also worth bearing in mind for NISI, for the kind of family of parents you have and local authorities, that actually it's kind of all our responsibility to make sure it does rise up the political agenda, and actually MPs and ministers are thinking creatively about what that can mean. So I guess the challenge back to people is kind of, how do you engage positively with government? How, and I say this to a lot of people, how can you engage with a government that really would like a magic money tree and would like to do a lot more? And I think Lee's right, inclusion is absolutely at the heart. I think they do care, but they just don't have the money to perhaps do what they originally would like to do. So how can you engage with that? How can the idea of kind of online learning, which for some politicians, maybe they have memories of COVID, or that, they don't have the experience of what it could mean, especially those who don't have experience of SEND children. So I think it's also a challenge for people to maybe take them through what it actually means and how it can be used alongside traditional schooling to help those children who, whether it's through anxiety or the medical needs, quite frankly, would benefit from a kind of hybrid system. But I just wouldn't, when speaking to politicians and people in the kind of political world, I just wouldn't always assume a huge amount of knowledge necessarily. So that's a kind of very brief overview of the politics, but I'm really happy later in the kind of Q&A session to answer anything a bit more specific on kind of where the government is, but I hope that's broadly helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. It's always nice to have a joint perspective of things, both from a professional point of view, but also a personal point of view as a parent. So really appreciate your feedback on that. And next up, and our final speaker before we move on to the question and answer session, is Emma Gunn, who's UK Business Development Manager at NISI. Now, Emma has been with NISI since 2009. The key focus is on building strong relationships with schools, local authorities, and other partners to ensure more young people, especially those unable to thrive in mainstream education, can access NISI's flexible and supportive learning solutions. Working closely with professionals and families, Emma has helped shape tailored programs that meet the unique needs of each student, empowering them to succeed. Emma brings a rich background of experience, having previously worked as a project manager, finance support, fundraiser for a local hospice, and volunteering peer-to-peer support. And her work at NISI is grounded in a deep belief that every learner deserves an education that fits and a future they can believe in. Emma, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about how we, NISI, support schools, local authorities, students, families, especially when it comes to looking for education, finding flexible education, and looking at different solutions for students who just don't fit in what you would call the traditional setting. Lots of different reasons why, whether that's anxiety, medical needs, SEND, or other barriers, other complex barriers. What makes us different is we don't just offer online lessons. We look at different levels of support. We look at schools and local authorities and how we work with them every single day. We understand their pressures that they're under, whether that's a safeguarding, whether it's attendance, funding, all of that type of thing. And then we kind of look at what we can put in place and how we can support them, how we can support the local authorities, how we can support the families and the schools like moving forward. When we work with schools specifically, we look at it more of a partnership. So we look to see where we could add capacity. We look to see where we can look at options. We find that some students might just need one subject, or they might need several. So we'll look at a full timetable for them. It might be that they just need a short-term intervention, or they might need to be with us for a full qualification. So we like to look at all of the different kind of outcomes per student. Same with local authorities as well, just a slightly different way when we look at plans, educational health and care plans. How we look at it is, and how we offer this support is we've got small live teacher-led classes with qualified subject specialist teachers. We offer, full attendance reports, engagement reporting. We do termly progress reports. We can offer updates at any point. So our schools have got access to their own portal. They can look at the students' progression. We offer careers advice and guidance to our students as well. We have dedicated student officers that can put those sessions in place. We have dedicated safeguarding leads, we have virtual mentors, and we also have face-to-face mentors that can support with our young people in their home or out and about in the community, looking at life skills and things like that. Another way we can support schools is through our learning zones, and what they are is the on-site areas that our students can access live lessons throughout the school day. What that does is it may give that young person a little bit of rest from a classroom setting, But what it does stop the school is sending them off role somewhere. So again, it's another way that we can put extra support in place. But we follow the same, whether it's long term or whether it's our short term offer, we can be very flexible within that. From a local authority point of view, we have a lot of focus around EHCPs, post-16 transitions, ensuring our young people are not falling through any that you want approved. Aimed on an EHCP as an educational setting. We do thorough consultations, we align everything we do with EHCP outcomes, and we give our local authorities the assurance that our students are accessing meaningful and accredited education. We do reviews. We have a dedicated team, our EHCP team. They will arrange all of the reviews, complete all of the follow-ups and all things like that. So we literally cover from the student being with us, ready to whether they move on or we maintain and they continue with us. We're very proud to say that we're the only online provider to achieve the IQM Centre of Excellence Award for inclusion, which is a real testament to the care and quality of everything that we do. And at the heart of all this, it's all about helping our students who might have been written off elsewhere. We want to re-engage them, we want to rebuild their confidence, and we want them to achieve real outcomes. That could be a student in year 9 who hasn't been in school for quite some time, or even down to a post-16 student who just needs functional skills to move forward. We can step in and we can put this in place for them. We can put the support in place for them. Thank you very much for your time, and I've really appreciated it today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And it's always great to hear about the insight and level of support that you and the wider team at NISI are providing to schools and local authorities around the country. I think the key bit from what you were saying was how much of it was centered around the child and the student. And I know that's always going to be key. So thanks for sharing that. So hopefully the panelists have given everyone a bit of an idea and the context behind why we're here today. We're now going to move on to the question and answer session. We'll try and answer as many of the questions in the remaining time that we've got, which is about 26, 27 minutes. And if there's anything specific that requires more time, then we're happy to connect afterwards and address those on a one-to-one basis. We've got a mix of questions covering NISI as well as government and policy. And if we can invite everyone back in, the first question is around the subject of education, health and care plans. So Jen, if it's all right, I'd like to point this one in your direction first. So by the sound of it, and we hear that there's rumblings going on around government, that we could see drastic changes to EHCPs in the future. I was just wondering what direction you think this could take.
So what I am hearing, and it is relatively consistent, so I think it's definitely the direction of travel at the moment, is that the government would like to essentially remove EHCPs from children who are kind of higher, with high functioning needs or needs that can be met by mainstream. However, maintain EHCPs for children with high acuity needs, and with the children who they think, and this is kind of very broad, to be honest, the detail, I don't think from all conversations has necessarily been kind of thought through. And I know that actually a lot of charities have been quite worried about some of the conversations they've had with government because of the detail not necessarily being thought through. But the idea would then be that you'd be able to incorporate relatively large numbers of children into mainstream schools and then build out the SEND department to train all teachers with, to kind of upskill them on SEN in particular, and that would be ideal. And I think part of that absolutely genuinely comes from a place of inclusion. And look, personally, my son is able to cope in a mainstream school, but that is because of the provisions in the HCP, I should add. And this is, I think, the worry for a lot of people, and especially some of the autism charities I'm kind of in regular contact, which is actually they are able to cope because of these provisions. Now, if you take that legal basis away and you then don't fund a school adequately because you've taken away that provision, so the council doesn't provide them with whatever top up they're getting, whatever band they get from the council, well, what will that mean? And also, let's be honest, from personal experience, we know that in a lot of schools you have lots and lots of children with the HCPs, but then you have lots of children currently on the SEN register, and that the department is already, they reflect back to parents all the time, we already don't have enough resource, and now you're going to expect us to have even less with more pupils. And that is what a lot of charities are reflecting back to government, which is this would sound great if you're telling us it comes with X number of millions to fund it, and you have a plan for the in-between period, which is when you start taking away kind of support for these children, expect them to go into mainstream, yet haven't trained up. So that's where with the HCPs things are looking. And I've certainly had conversations with people in and around number 10 who have said kind of part of the reason is it is the funding. It's local councils just not being able to, when they kind of look ahead, the demand is so great at the moment. And I think a belief that certainly HCPs aren't necessary, and actually the support they give should just be given, and actually mainstream schools should be able to accommodate a neurodiverse student population. Again, in theory, yes, but the reality is very different. So I think this is where the government's thinking is. This is where Kat McKinnell, who's the SEN kind of minister, I think is genuine. I also think the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is. I think you have individuals in the cabinet who have direct experience with SEN, with children, with EHCPs. I think it is all, I do think they care, but I think they have not properly thought through, in a world where we just don't have the funding, how perhaps this would work, and were slightly surprised by some of the pushback that they've been receiving from various kind of charities and lobby groups.
And I think, and I'll probably bring Emma into this in a moment, a lot of the discussions that go on are around getting children into mainstream school and putting the focus on the school to be able to provide that level of support. But depending on the complexity of need, and whilst we all know that school's probably going to be the best place for children and young people for socialization or whatever else, we know in reality that's possibly not the case. So Emma, what are you hearing from the sector?
From schools specifically, we get a lot of teachers, SENCOs, inclusion officers, all lots of different people kind of contacting us. It's a bit of a mixed bag sometimes. They really want to put provision in place for these students. The schools recognise that a traditional classroom is sometimes not always, whether that's full-time or part-time, it's not always the full, like the whole picture. And that's great. And we have families that get in touch with us, and in the same message, they're the ones living at home with their children. They see, everything in the background from, the confidence dropping and all of those different types of things. And all they want to do is keep their son, daughter in education and thriving. The other side of it is, they've got funding barriers. They're looking at attendance. I know I spoke about that a little bit earlier. Attendance is a big thing at the moment. For our young people to study with us at home is not an attendance mark for them. And if that's what they have to focus on, then that becomes a barrier to the families, to the school, and to our young people as well. So it is very much a picture of, they know where the need is, they know what they need to do. It's how do they get to that point and tick all of the boxes as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. We do actually have a question from a parent, and I'm going to try and spread these questions out as much as possible. But Emma, you're going to have this one again. So, a parent whose son is on the autistic spectrum, are struggling, or the school struggling to support. And this kind of leads on from what we've just been talking about. At this stage, they haven't got any HCP, but I've been told that it's a great route forward. And they're just wondering how NISI could help with that and with that process.
First of all, yes, that if they're looking down the EHCP route, we'd always suggest they're speaking to the school and also their local authority person, whether that's parent partnership, to kind of go through those different steps with them. Us as an organisation absolutely empathise with our young family, with our families and our young students, especially when it comes to kind of those struggles and the fact that they need those different levels of tailored support. So when we do get those young people and they do have plans, this is where we can either do all of the education at home, as an example, then they've got all of the support from NISI, and then we work with the school, or it could be tailored. It could be that they have some element of school tuition, then they also have some element of home. Some even go down, some schools potentially go down like a flexi school approach too, which is a fantastic idea. So yeah, that's where we can slot in, because when a plan's in place and they've got funding attached to that, we can make sure that funding is going to quality education as well. And again, I spoke about it earlier, we focus on outcomes, we focus on progression, and we want to get them to the next step. So that's where NISI can step in and support with that process.
Okay. And we might come back to flexi schooling in a moment, because it's a phrase that seems to be coming up more and more often. I wanted to revert back, and we've got a question about NEETs. And Lee, I know you mentioned it when you were talking about the charter, and for those who aren't familiar with the phrase of not being in education, employment or training, a lot of the conversations today are about SEN and additional needs, and there can be a multitude of reasons why somebody becomes needs. But how would you say that the Every Learner Charter fits in with the government plans to reduce NEET numbers?
I think if you look at, and going back to what Jen was saying earlier, if you look at where the direction of travel is for the government in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of supporting young people, through the education system and an inclusive education system, as they talk about. There are obviously multiple challenges. Now, the challenges around the HCPs we've already talked about in some depth, but also challenges in terms of they're sort of ticking up numbers of young people who aren't in any form of education, employment or training currently at the moment. Now, actually, there is a direct correlation between that group and between sort of social conditions, whether that's poverty linked, whether that is they've been in the care system, whether they are they do have special, sometimes undiagnosed educational needs or social needs, and there's a direct correlation between those numbers. And in that, I think what we're trying to do with the charter is basically show that if you can find routes back in for people, wherever that may be, whether that's through online or hybrid learning, whether that's opportunities once if school has failed them the first time around, so those 16 plus students, that you can, if you have a system which is orientated towards finding ways to catch those students, and basically feed them back into the system and give them opportunities and give them a better way, a different way of learning, a different approach to learning, which they can then which they can attach themselves to and drive themselves forward. We obviously heard some really excellent examples earlier in terms of individuals who've come through NISI, come through the system, in terms of how they've been able to re-engage with society more broadly, but taking themselves out of that period of not being in education, employment and training. And it's the point behind the charter is, yes, it's to work for that kind of school age level, but it's to work beyond that and to ensure that we're not letting anyone down, that every learner does matter and that we can drive them forward.
And I think there's something there, whether it be about academic attainment, whether it be about literacy levels. quite often, and I think there's somebody out there, those who do become NEET, there tends to be a background of challenge and a checkered education experience that has led to them getting to that point. Again, I'm just going to throw back to Emma for first-hand knowledge of what's going on. I mean, in terms of the students who are coming through to NISI at the moment, are many of those in a position where they are out of the system, or is it just the fact that they're looking for alternatives?
It should be a very easy question to answer, but it isn't. We get lots of different types of young people that come through to us. Some of them have been out of education some time. The relationship with their school or that whatever educational setting they've been linked to is completely broken. And a lot of it's got to do with confidence and building confidence first to get them back into education. And there's like another layer to that as well. That's not the particular barrier. They might have other barriers. It might be anxiety, it might be SEND, but for whatever reason, they've got to that point. I know we talked about COVID earlier. A lot of our young people, especially who don't have educational health and care plans, are from that cohort, year 6 onwards. I think they're in like year 10, year 11 now, these young people. And they may have been those students who were on the cusp of kind of dropping out of education, and they've really struggled as they've gone through, all of the different years, to a point where they're not really at the level that they need to be. They've got lots of gaps, and they just want some outcomes for them before they move on to post 16. And that's where we can step in, because we don't just allocate our education to our students based on age. It's about ability as well. It's how we can get those gaps filled to move them on to the next step. So that's kind of like it is very much a mixed bag, but we boil it down to that it's for whatever reason there's been a barrier, and that's where we can slot in.
No, that's great. And I think just picking up on one of the points that Lee said there, it's not that the support and what the Learning Charter is aimed at is not just finishing at age 18. Obviously the HCP process, and I'm going to move on to get Drew's thoughts on something in a moment, but the fact that it extends beyond that, and it potentially looks at employability of young people and skills of young people. Drew, what are your thoughts on that sort of extended support beyond the compulsory and statutory school age?
Well, a lot, because if you look at it in the, as you can see, I'm quite a bit advanced age. But if you look at in the old days, when we had maybe 10-15% of our classroom with children with learning needs or issues, now if it's running up to 30% in some cases, that's a lot of young people who are going to come into the labor market without any education or any chances. So it's not just short term, it's long term. And we need to make sure that there are jobs and employability with our employers as well, and to accept that there's a diversity in, we need to look at the neurodiversity, and we need to look at inclusivity in workplace as well. So, I mean, as Lee talked about the COVID effect, we are starting to see that effect ripple through all the way into universities and also into the workplace. So this is not just stopping at 25 or 19. It is continuous, and lifelong learning has to become a mantra for everybody now. Does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I said we were going to circle back to flexi schooling, and Emma was good enough to bring it up. And again, a parent, and Jen, you know what it's like from a parent's perspective. So a parent whose daughter has high anxiety, really struggling to study 5 days a week in a physical setting, and they are seriously considering the homeschooling option, but doing it part-time. As I think a lot of parents found out during COVID, teaching isn't the easiest thing in the world. So what she's asking is there something that NISI can do to support on, say, a part-time basis if their daughter's attending physical school the rest of the time? And that's for Emma.
So yeah, absolutely. Without kind of going back over other things as well, you know, when it comes to NISI, we can absolutely support at a like a blended timetable. A lot of our, you know, young people and families do want their children educated at home, but there is elements of what they want to access at school as well. So for me, when it comes to kind of flexi schooling, and those families who are not necessarily teachers, they don't know anything about, you know, they're not in that sector, it's actually a very, very good option to have. I'm finding that a lot more schools are picking up on this idea as well, because it does fit more with those types of learners. And our young people get the best of both options.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. We've got 8 minutes, so time for a couple more questions. And I think, Jen, I might start with you on this next one. I think a lot of us understand the struggles that schools are going through, whether it be to do with funding, support, whatever it might be. But why would you say it's important that mainstream schools are not expected to go it alone when it comes to SEND?
I think it's really important. And I think actually sometimes a lot of mainstream schools feel that they are and feel a little bit fatigued. Now, sometimes I think that just might be a little bit lack of knowledge in terms of where else they can kind of turn. But I think unfortunately for a long time it's been quite an adversarial system, which has kind of placed schools supporting parents to get EHCPs that will help their children, which will also then fund the schools with the council. It's led to a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, I think, that Senkos have. So I do think in terms of mainstream, it's kind of, you know, they have very little time. So sometimes they, you know, we've had lots of parents in the past say they've said that to get an EHCP, we have to prove that X amount, £6,000 is already being spent. Not true. There's a very clear legal, you know, kind of basis. Now, a lot of that, I think mainstream schools, it's not that they don't want to be honest with parents, it's just that kind of flow of information. Now, and when you were talking about the kind of hybrid and the flexible, do you know what? In all the conversations I've had with, I can't even begin to tell you how many Senkos over the year, not one proactively said, well, if there is an issue with school avoidance, have you considered this? And having spoken to other parents, I know that it's not always something that they've been proactively kind of guided towards. So I think it is about supporting mainstream, but that's kind of an opportunity, because I think if more Senkos and the, you know, inclusion officers and head teachers frankly understood that, they might feel a little bit less exhausted when, to be honest, as we say, the kind of SEN percentage in a lot of schools has risen and is rising. And a lot of the time they just are very worried that they won't be able to support, you know, they won't be able to support these children. They do have an inclusive ethos and they do want to, you know, give every child the kind of support they need, but quite frankly do not have the resources to do that. You know, there isn't the specialist TAs, there isn't the kind of space, literally there isn't the space, whether that's an OT space or what have you. So I think actually kind of supporting some of those mainstreams to think maybe kind of creatively and that there are other options is really important. And one of the other things, I mean, I don't know how true this is, but a lot of people are quite concerned about, I'm sure everyone knows the HCPs, if you apply and you're told the council won't assess you, you can go to tribunal. And the idea is a lot of cases in my local council, for example, you know, 90% of cases that go to tribunal are then awarded. So they use it as a kind of barrier, a triage method, but to say no to everyone. So the government, some of the kind of rumours that came out and that I've certainly heard, is taking away that possibility of tribunals because of the costs and the process. which I think worries a lot of people as well. So I think if you're not going to give those, then the opportunity to kind of, well, actually, where does home learning come into that? Because there will probably be, what's the process? How long will these children be waiting, and for what? And if they're not going to get an EHCP, then what conversation will they be having with the mainstream school, which might be the hybrid and the flexible? So I think there are plenty of opportunities, but it will just involve that kind of, I guess, that education, kind of taking people on that journey as well.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Lee, I saw you nodding away there. How do you think that the charter, sort of as it stands at the moment, can support schools or advise or guide schools in the way of doing things?
I think, look, I mean, let's not. I mean, the point behind the charter is, it was, it was to bring together all that kind of knowledge and expertise that had come from this side and broader terms than that, and basically say, okay, what are the barriers that we as NISI face, but what are the barriers that the schools we work with face? What are the barriers that the learners that they face? And it was about trying to unpick those and work out what a potential where you could sort of take away some of those barriers and to ensure that there's a better, smoother system around. And that's ultimately what the charter is about. So the things we kind of picked on were, ultimately were, yes, okay, reforming EHCPs is a complicated process, but I think, ultimately there's a whole series of things in there that were about, access to exams for external candidates. The point that Emma made about whether someone's marked as absent or present in school. There are sort of little things that can be moved and shifted to make the system work better. And I think the whole point behind the chart is it is partly, yes, about a vision, but it's a vision in kind of holistic, every learner matters way, but it's about a whole series of small things that can be done and small changes that can be made to the system, which aren't invasive, aren't expensive, but can make things a lot better. But ultimately, as well, is that if we can get to a point whereby there's a recognition that high quality online, high quality hybrid education is entirely legitimate and entirely the same as, it has the same kind of support and guidance and education levels and quality and rigor that is provided offline or provided in the classroom, then we can that's a kind of mindset shift that will help schools as well as it helps as well. And it's that kind of things, the combination of both a mind shift but also the little changes that help can drive this thing forward.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant. Thanks for that. We're getting tight on time. There is one question I do just want to get to Emma. If you can sum it up relatively quickly. It's been picked up that NISI is an independent specialist college. Some people will know what that means, some people won't. So if we can use that as the final question, and if you can just run through that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll be as quick as I can. So yes, we are DFE approved, Section 41 approved, so that it can be named for post-16 students on their educational health and care plan. But that does give us like 1,000 spaces on our roll as well for post-16 students. That for our local authorities is something that what I found kind of in my role has been so beneficial, especially for those young people who are struggling to go into a building, to go into a classroom. They can be on our roll. We can take over the process of the EHCP and reviews, be responsible for that young person and get them prepared for when they move on to their next step. It works really well for our local authorities too, because we've got this really good process in place. So when they send in the consultation, we can go through every single outcome. We can look at what areas where we can meet need, and then again look at the outcomes over a period of time as well, especially if the post-16, because we are the name setting. So that is a little bit of an overview as to what I mean by our specialist independent college.
That's brilliant. Thanks a lot. I just want to refer back to a comment that's come in on Facebook from Chris. Yep, as an organisation, we're always there to challenge and hold people to account. So we will definitely be in touch with you with regards to our experience and knowledge of the SCN arena. So we'll make contact and catch up after this. As we come to the end, and we're pretty much on time, I'd like to thank our panelists, Drew, Lee, Jen, and Emma, for your thoughts, insights, and sharing of experience and knowledge. I'd also like to thank everyone who's attended today. I hope you've learned some bits about the topics discussed, and I hope we've answered sort of some of the questions, if not all. But if not, then we're happy to carry out further sessions and discussions with you outside of this forum. We will be promoting the further webinars as part of this series through social media, or you can sign up to notifications on future webinars through Eventbrite. There's also more information on our website at nisai.com. Once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.